These are the scariest Scooby-Doo episodes ever made, starting with one that turns the Mystery Machine Gang into survival horror victims. Escape from Mystery Manor. In Season 1, Episode 9, the gang discovers what happens when there's literally nowhere to run. This episode traps them in the worst possible scenario, underground with no escape and a relentless pursuer hunting them through the darkness. Escape from Mystery Manor transforms Scooby-Doo into a pure survival horror experience. The gang gets lured to an old mansion that's been lost underground for decades. Once they're inside, they realize the place is a death trap filled with hidden passages, secret rooms, and corridors that seem to stretch on forever. But the real terror comes from the zombie-like figure that stalks them through every room. This isn't your typical Scooby-Doo monster that shows up, scares people, and then gets unmasked. This thing is relentless. It doesn't stop to deliver threatening monologues or give the gang time to set traps. It just hunts them like a predator, appearing from shadows, emerging from hidden passages, and following them no matter where they try to hide. The claustrophobic setting removes every safety net the gang usually relies on. No mystery machine to escape in, no way to call for help, no friendly townspeople to turn to, just endless underground rooms filled with decay and the constant sound of footsteps getting closer. The episode builds dread through pure isolation and the growing realization that they might not make it out alive. But if you thought being trapped underground was terrifying, wait until you see what happens when someone you trust hides the most disturbing secret imaginable. The legend of Alice May. In Season 1, Episode 5, Fred learns that falling in love can be deadlier than facing any monster. Alice May proves that the scariest threats are the ones that get close to your heart before revealing their true nature. The episode starts innocently enough. A new girl named Alice May arrives in Crystal Cove and immediately catches Fred's attention. She seems perfect, beautiful, charming, and genuinely interested in him. For once, Fred gets distracted from traps and mysteries because he's found something more important. The romance builds naturally, and you start rooting for Fred to finally find happiness. But Alice May carries a secret that connects her directly to one of the most disturbing entities in the entire series, a faceless ghost bride that haunts Crystal Cove's history. The revelation doesn't come as a cheap jump scare. Instead, it builds slowly as small details start adding up, creating a growing sense of unease about Alice's true identity. When the faceless mask reveal finally happens, it hits like a punch to the gut. The psychological horror of realizing that someone you trusted, someone you cared about, has been deceiving you the entire time creates a deeper fear than any monster could. It plays on fundamental anxieties about being able to trust our own judgment about people, especially those closest to us. The episode proves that love can be weaponized, that our deepest emotions can be turned against us by forces we never saw coming. When you can't trust your own heart, nowhere feels safe. Speaking of feeling unsafe, the next episode traps the gang in a scenario borrowed straight from the most terrifying horror movies ever made: night terrors. In Season 2, Episode 16, an avalanche forces the gang into a situation that transforms their cartoon world into pure psychological horror. When you're snowed in with a supernatural presence and there's absolutely nowhere to run, every shadow becomes a potential threat. Night Terrors doesn't just reference The Shining, it fully commits to recreating that movie's most terrifying elements in animated form. The Mystery Machine crashes during a massive avalanche, leaving the gang stranded and forced to take shelter in an abandoned hotel. The building feels wrong from the moment they step inside, with long, empty corridors, rooms that seem to watch them, and an oppressive atmosphere that grows heavier with each passing hour. The supernatural presence that hunts them through the hotel isn't just scary because of what it does, it's scary because of how it makes them feel. The entity feeds on fear and isolation, growing stronger as the gang becomes more desperate and paranoid. Every creak of the building, every shadow that moves wrong, every door that won't stay closed becomes evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with this place. The episode uses classic psychological horror techniques that shouldn't work in a cartoon but absolutely do. The feeling of being watched when no one's there, sounds that come from empty rooms, and the gradual realization that the building itself might be alive and hostile. When you're cut off from the outside world with something that wants to drive you insane, every minute becomes a battle to maintain your sanity. But even haunted hotels can't compare to the terror of having your own mind turned into a battlefield where reality itself becomes your enemy. Nightmare in Red. In Season 2, Episode 22, the gang faces something far worse than any external threat. They lose the ability to trust their own perceptions. When your mind becomes the weapon being used against you, nowhere is safe because you can't escape from your own thoughts. Nightmare in Red breaks every rule about what's real and what's possible. The team undergoes hypnosis that sends them spiraling through psychological landscapes that defy all logic. Hallways stretch and contract without warning. rooms transform into completely different spaces, and the laws of physics stop applying whenever it's most disorienting. The episode doesn't just show them experiencing strange visions, it makes you question whether anything you're seeing actually happened. The shifting dream logic creates a constant state of unease because you can never be sure what's real. Characters have conversations that might be memories, encounter situations that might be fantasies, and make discoveries that might be delusions. This uncertainty creates a deeper level of horror than any monster could achieve. When you can't trust your own senses, when your memories might be false, when your perceptions could be completely wrong, you lose the most fundamental tool for navigating reality. The episode plays with the terrifying idea that consciousness itself might be unreliable. The psychological warfare reaches its peak when they're searching for the evil entity while their minds are under attack. Fighting an external enemy is hard enough, but fighting an enemy that can rewrite your thoughts and reshape your reality is almost impossible. And speaking of impossible odds, the next episode shows what happens when the heroes actually lose everything they're fighting to protect. Come undone. In Season 2, Episode 26, the series finale delivers the ultimate nightmare scenario, the complete end of everything. This episode literally destroys the world and forces the gang to watch it happen, powerless to stop the annihilation of everyone and everything they love. Come Undone escalates the horror to genuinely cosmic levels. The evil entity doesn't just threaten Crystal Cove or even just Earth, it threatens the existence of reality itself. The apocalyptic imagery shows the systematic destruction of everything that has ever existed or ever will exist. Buildings crumble, people disappear, and the very fabric of reality starts tearing apart. The gang becomes the sole survivors in a universe that's being systematically erased. They have to watch their friends, their families, their entire world get consumed by forces beyond their comprehension. There's no clever plan that can fix this, no trap that can solve the problem, no way to unmask the villain and make everything return to normal. The episode moves beyond typical monster of the week storytelling into genuine cosmic horror territory. When the stakes become the literal survival of existence itself, when you're fighting for the right of anything to continue existing, the pressure becomes absolutely crushing. The psychological weight of knowing that failure means the end of everything creates a level of stress that goes far beyond typical children's programming. What makes it even more terrifying is that the gang has to continue fighting even when they've already lost almost everything. They have to find the strength to keep going when hope itself seems impossible. Sometimes, though, the real horror comes from discovering that supernatural threats are being caused by very human corruption and conspiracy. Haunting in Crystal Cove. In Season 1, Episode 16, the gang learns that sometimes the most terrifying revelations come from understanding why supernatural events are happening. The real horror isn't always the ghost itself. It's discovering the human evil that created the haunting in the first place. Mayor Jones finds himself under attack by a violent poltergeist that seems determined to drive him insane. Objects fly through the air without warning, furniture moves on its own, and the attacks become increasingly personal and vicious. The supernatural activity escalates beyond typical ghost behavior into something that feels genuinely malevolent and targeted. Mystery Inc. gets called in to solve what appears to be a straightforward haunting case, but they quickly discover that nothing about this situation is straightforward. The poltergeist isn't just randomly violent, it's trying to expose buried secrets that go to the heart of Crystal Cove's dark history. The traditional horror elements of flying objects and supernatural manifestations serve as a mask for much deeper and more disturbing human corruption. When the truth finally comes out, it reveals layers of conspiracy, cover-ups, and betrayals that make the supernatural threat seem almost secondary. The episode takes familiar horror tropes and makes them terrifying again by adding genuine stakes and human consequences. When you realize that the ghost is actually the victim trying to expose the real villains, it transforms from a supernatural threat into something much more complex and unsettling. But even complex human evil can't compete with the perfect atmospheric nightmare that comes from being hunted in the one place that should be peaceful for the dead. The gathering gloom. In Season 2, Episode 12, the gang discovers that even graveyards aren't safe when the dead refuse to stay buried. Some locations are naturally terrifying, and this episode proves that atmosphere and setting can be more frightening than any individual monster. The gathering gloom creates the perfect nightmare scenario through pure environmental horror. The gang faces a relentless cemetery ghoul in a graveyard, shrouded by supernatural fog that reduces visibility to almost nothing. The creature emerges from the mist without warning, attacks with inhuman speed, then disappears back into the fog before anyone can get a clear look at it. The fog doesn't just limit visibility, it seems to have a mind of its own, thickening whenever the gang tries to escape and thinning when the ghoul wants to attack. Every gravestone becomes a potential hiding spot for something hostile. Every shadow could conceal a threat, and every step forward takes you deeper into territory that belongs to the dead. The bleak graveyard setting combined with the supernatural fog creates an oppressive mood that builds dread with every scene. When you can't see more than a few feet in any direction, when every sound could signal an attack, when the very ground beneath your feet is filled with the remains of the dead, paranoia becomes a survival mechanism. The episode turns the cemetery into a maze of terror, where the gang can't find the exit, can't see their attacker clearly, and can't escape the growing certainty that they're being hunted by something that knows the graveyard far better than any living person ever could. Speaking of crossing boundaries, the next episode pushes into territory that most cartoons would never dare to explore: Attack of the Headless Horror. In Season 1, Episode 8, Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated proves it's willing to cross lines that other children's shows wouldn't even consider. When a monster starts stealing heads from its victims, the gang faces their most disturbing adversary yet, and viewers realize this isn't your typical Saturday morning cartoon. Attack of the Headless Horror doesn't just reference decapitation as an abstract threat, it makes it the central horror of the entire episode. A creature stalks through Crystal Cove, systematically stealing heads from people throughout the town. Victims don't just get scared or knocked unconscious like in typical cartoon violence, they lose actual body parts in a way that's genuinely disturbing and permanent. The head stealing creates panic that goes beyond normal fear. When people start losing parts of their bodies, when the violence has real and lasting consequences, it signals that this show operates by different rules than other cartoons. The threat feels genuinely dangerous because the stakes are higher than just being frightened or embarrassed. The creature itself embodies body horror in a way that's unusual for children's programming. It's not just scary because of what it looks like, it's scary because of what it does to other people. The episode forces viewers to confront the reality that some threats can cause permanent